one loud customer, one calm cashier, and a store owner with a memory he never talks about. No one expected how this standoff would end. The sun hung high over the little town of Greystone, pouring golden light over the sidewalks and storefronts like warm syrup. It was the kind of weekday afternoon where time felt unhurried, where the breeze was lazy, the traffic light and people walked a little slower with their sunglasses perched on their noses and errands in mind. The doors of Maple Market, a modest grocery store tucked between a laundromat and a florist, slid open and shut in a steady rhythm. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, blending with the low buzz of the refrigeration units and the gentle beep-beep of barcode scanners. An instrumental jazz playlist played faintly through the speakers, barely audible above the occasional murmur of customers exchanging greetings or asking where the almond milk had moved this week. Behind checkout lane 3 stood Marcus, his posture relaxed but alert, a polite half-smile playing at the corners of his lips. In his early 30s, he had a quiet presence, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of dark roasted coffee and eyes that held something deeper than the words he spoke. His voice, when he used it, was steady and warm, with the careful patience of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of staying composed under pressure. To most people, Marcus was just the cashier, but to the regulars elderly, Mr. Crane, who came in every Thursday for prune juice, busy mum of 3 Carla who always forgot one item and had to run back, he was something of a favorite. He remembered birthdays, allergies, the fact that Mrs. Gomez liked her eggs in a separate bag. He never rushed anyone, never raised his voice, and always greeted each customer with a genuine, "How's your day going?" For Marcus, this job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. It was dignity. It was routine in a world that often tried to rattle him. He wore his name tag proudly, pressed his uniform shirt every morning, and arrived 5 minutes early for every shift. Today had started like most days. The line moved at a comfortable pace. Customers filtered in and out with half-filled carts and short shopping lists. A toddler in a cart seat giggled at Marcus as he handed her a sticker with a wink. An older man asked Marcus how his mother was doing. Marcus smiled and said she was feeling stronger after her surgery. "Thanks for asking." He liked afternoons like this. The sun slanting in through the front windows cast soft shadows across the tile floor. The rhythm of scanning, bagging, and polite small talk was almost meditative. There was a kind of peace in the predictable dot. It was during a lull between customers, when Marcus paused to sip from his water bottle and glanced toward the front door. The glass reflected the brightness outside, obscuring the shape until the doors slid open and in walked a woman who didn't fit the usual tone of the day. She moved fast, her footsteps loud against the tile. Shoulder-length blonde hair bounced. Behind oversized sunglasses, she wore expensive-looking athletic wear and carried a designer handbag on one arm as if it might snap off. Her wrist from sheer disdain. Her lips were pursed tight, her jaw set. Marcus straightened unconsciously. Not because he feared her, he didn't, but there was an energy that walked in with her, the kind that changed the temperature of a room before a word was spoken. He watched as she bypassed the carts, brushed past a young man reaching for a shopping basket, and made a beeline toward the produce section like it had offended her. A few customers turned to look, the kind of person who left tension in her wake like perfume. But Marcus pushed the moment aside and focused on the customer in front of him, a man with a half cart of frozen meals and protein shakes. They chatted briefly about the heat wave. Nothing remarkable, just another transaction. Beep, bag, receipt. Then came the next customer. Then the next. But the woman hadn't left. She now stood at the far end of the store, tapping her foot rapidly, glancing around as if expecting someone to read her mind and appear with whatever she was looking for. Marcus noticed the way she stared at the ceiling tiles, annoyed by their existence. She picked up a container of blueberries, frowned at it, put it back harder than necessary. He had seen her once or twice before, ever with a smile. Still, he remained in his lane, calm, ready, because that was who he was. His mother used to tell him, "People may bring storms with them, but you don't have to stand in the rain if you don't open the door." So he kept his door closed, at least for now. Outside, a car horn beeped. A child laughed. Inside the market, time moved gently forward, unaware that this ordinary afternoon was about to change and that Marcus was about to become part of a moment the town would talk about long after the groceries were bagged and the sun had gone down. The hum of the store continued like a steady heartbeat, background noise to an otherwise peaceful day. A mother guided her young daughter past the cereal aisle. An elderly man squinted at the labels on a can of soup. And at checkout lane 3, Marcus gently placed a bunch of bananas into a paper bag and handed them to a smiling customer with a nod and a quiet, "You have a good one." Then, the automatic doors hissed open again. It was subtle, at first, just a change in sound, in air pressure. But some moments arrive, not with thunder, but with a shift in temperature. And the woman who stepped through those sliding doors didn't so much enter as invade the space. She moved fast, like she was late for something. Or perhaps like the world had failed to wait for her. Diane, mid-50s, white, tall, and slender, with the kind of posture that made her look like she was perpetually judging a room. Her skin was lightly tanned, her blonde hair styled into a sleek bob that didn't move an inch as she walked. Large, black sunglasses concealed her eyes, but her mouth, tight and pulled at the corners, said enough. She wore a pristine white zip-up workout jacket with gold trim, matching leggings, and spotless sneakers that looked more designer than functional. On her shoulder hung a beige Louis Vuitton handbag, the kind with metal accents that glinted under the fluorescent lights. She didn't grab a cart. She didn't greet anyone. She marched straight through the entryway with clipped steps, her heels striking the tile like punctuation marks. Marcus noticed her immediately, not because she stood out, but because her energy did. Even before she said a word, she felt like a disruption. The kind of person who made spaces shrink just by stepping into them. Two young men chatting near. The deli counter instinctively moved aside as she passed. A child holding his mother's hand looked up at her with wide eyes, then clutched tighter. And near checkout lane 1, a woman holding a gallon of milk hesitated before speaking to the cashier. Watching the woman strut past, Diane barely noticed. Or if she did, she didn't care. She made a sharp turn into the snack aisle, mumbling something about how nothing in the store was ever where it should be. She picked up a bag of trail mix, squinted at the label as if it had personally offended her, then dropped it back onto the shelf, without care for where it landed. Her fingers drummed restlessly on the handle of her purse as she moved from shelf to shelf. Muttering under her breath, Marcus turned his attention back to his lane, finishing up with a customer who thanked him and gave a small smile. But he could feel her still here, her like a distant siren growing louder. Moments later, Diane reappeared at the front of the store, her arms full of items. She hadn't waited in line, she hadn't asked, she simply breezed up to lane and stepped in front of the woman who had been waiting patiently, her cart half full. "Excuse me," the woman said, surprised. Diane didn't even look at her. "I'm in a hurry," she snapped. "I only have a few things." Marcus blinked. He glanced at the woman whose turn it rightfully was, then back at Diane. His hands remained still on the counter. "Ma'am," he said calmly, his voice even and respectful. "I'm happy to ring you up right after this customer. It won't take long." Diane let out a sharp laugh. "Unbelievable. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Slow service. People standing around pretending to be helpful." She waved a manicured hand toward him. "Can you just do your job?" Her tone wasn't just rude, it was sharp, biting-like. Each word was meant to sting. The customer behind her stepped back, awkward, her eyes darting between Diane and Marcus. The room had shifted again. The jazz music overhead now sounded too soft, the lights too bright, the air somehow thicker. Marcus didn't flinch, not yet, but something inside him pressed down. He had dealt with difficult customers before, impatient ones, entitled ones, even the occasional loud complaint. But this was something else. She wasn't just in a hurry. She was looking for a target. He could see it in the way her lip curled, in how she scanned him not as a person, but as a problem. And the worst part, the subtle flick of her eyes, the unspoken message in her body language. "You work here. I don't have to respect you." He forced a breath in through his nose. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice like stone beneath water. "Please let me finish helping this customer, and I'll be right with you." Diane scoffed. "You're unbelievable. First lazy, now rude." She turned to the rest of the store like she was seeking an audience. "This is what passes for service these days." Her voice carried. A few heads turned. Some pretended not to notice. A man in the corner of the store lowered his magazine. The woman who had been cut in line took a step back. Her face flushed, unsure whether to say something or just let it go. The kind of moment where bystanders freeze, unsure which way the current will turn. Marcus remained steady. but the tension in his jaw gave him away. He reached for the scanner, as if starting the transaction might defuse the moment, but Diane wasn't done. "Don't you glare at me," she hissed. "You people always think someone's out to get you. Maybe if you did your jobs properly, we wouldn't have to complain." "You people." The words hit with acquired violence. Marcus felt them like cold water trickling down his spine, and somewhere, from the back of the store, someone else had heard it too. For a long second, silence hovered over the checkout lane like a held breath. Marcus stood behind the register, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't moved a muscle. His words had been measured, calm, and polite, but to Diane, they might as well have been a slap in the face. Her sunglasses were now pushed up onto her head, revealing a pair of sharp blue eyes that locked onto him with laser precision. A vein in her temple throbbed beneath her foundation. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for half the store to hear. "Are you accusing me of cutting the line?" Marcus didn't flinch. He simply held her gaze, respectful but steady. "I'm not accusing you of anything, ma'am. I'm just asking that you wait your turn, like everyone else." That was all it took. Diane's face twisted. Her lips curled back as if she'd tasted something rotten. "Disrespectful," she snapped. "That's what this is. You're standing there, talking to me like I'm some kind of criminal, like I'm beneath you." Marcus's mouth opened slightly in surprise, but he quickly closed it again. He knew this tone, it wasn't outrage, it was performance. She was crafting a scene, and he had been cast as the villain in her narrative. Her voice rose another octave. "I come in here, trying to get a few things done on my lunch break, and I'm met with attitude from someone who clearly doesn't even know how to do their job." A few heads turned. The mother with the child from earlier was now standing, frozen in the dairy aisle, half crouched, her toddler clinging to her leg. The young man near the deli slowly slid his phone from his pocket. Marcus swallowed. "Ma'am, I haven't raised my voice. I'm only asking that you let me serve this customer first. Then I'll gladly help you." But Diane wasn't listening. Or maybe she was, but only to find fuel for her fire. "Oh, I see how it is," she spat. "God forbid someone like me wants fair treatment. You people never want to hear that, do you?" Her words hit the floor like a dropped match. A sharp intake of breath came from the older woman in line behind Diana, petite, gray-haired woman in a floral blouse and orthopedic shoes. She took a step forward, her voice soft but firm. "There's no need to speak to him like that," she said. "He's just doing his job, and you did skip the line." Diane wheeled around on her. "Mind your business, Grandma. I don't need a lecture from someone who smells like cough drops and mothballs." The older woman blinked, taken aback, but didn't respond. Her cheeks flushed with humiliation, and she slowly backed away. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. He wanted to speak, wanted to defend the woman, to say something that would reset the world back to its proper place, but the air around him felt like glass. One wrong move, and everything might shatter. He looked around. A man by the magazine rack had paused mid-page, staring openly now. A teenage girl held a carton of orange juice against her chest, unmoving. Even the music over the speaker's jazz guitar felt like it had softened in shame. Diane wasn't done. "Every time I come in here, it's the same thing," she snarled, turning her attention back to Marcus. "Lazy, incompetent workers, slow lines, no customer service. I bet if I looked at your resume, there wouldn't be a single qualification on it." She was leaning closer now, her voice sharp and sneering. "Probably got this job as a favor, or because they had a quota to fill. Isn't that right?" There it was, the real message behind the noise, not even veiled anymore. Marcus's jaw clenched. The weight of her words hit somewhere deep in his ribs, like a bruise that had been pressed one too many times. He felt the flush creeping up his neck, not from anger but from the familiar sting of injustice, from the knowledge that if he raised his voice, if he defended himself too harshly, he would become the problem in the eyes of the world, watching. So he didn't speak. Instead, he did what he had trained himself to do for years: breathe, focus, steady. But even so, he couldn't stop the way his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the next item on the belt. The customer who'd been cut in line gave Marcus a sympathetic glance but didn't intervene. And how could he blame her? Most people didn't want to pick a side in public. They just wanted their groceries and a quiet afternoon. Diane, sensing her power over the moment, seemed to feed off the silence. She smiled now, but not kindly. She looked victorious. Marcus met her gaze, Not with defiance, but with something else. Dignity. He didn't match her energy. He refused to, but his silence wasn't surrender, was control. It was strength, and she didn't know what to do with that. Then, from somewhere off to the side, a man's voice murmured, barely audible, "Someone should say something." And just like that, a crack formed in the wall of silence. Someone had seen. Someone had named it. Diane still stood there, fuming, victorious in her own mind. But behind her, in the back office, someone else was watching everything unfold. And this time, she wouldn't be the only one deciding how this story ends. Behind the swinging doors at the rear of Maple Market, past the break room with its half-stocked vending machine and the stack of cardboard boxes waiting to be broken down, was a small, windowless office that smelled faintly of ink toner and old coffee. Mr. Patel sat in a worn leather chair, one leg crossed neatly over the other, his hands folded in his lap. A thin stream of afternoon light filtered in through the single dusty skylight above, casting a soft glow on the mahogany desk. In front of him, the computer monitor on the desk showed a split-screen view of the store, 4 camera angles, each capturing a corner of the market in grainy detail. He was watching Lane 3. The tinny sound of Diane's voice came through the small wall-mounted speaker above the monitor, harsh, shrill, unmistakable, lazy, incompetent, and rude. "This is what passes for customer service now. Honestly, you should be ashamed of yourself." Mr. Patel didn't blink. He leaned slightly forward, narrowing, his eyes at the screen where Marcus stood behind the counter, his expression calm but unmistakably hurt. The woman before him, tall, blonde, manicured, was practically vibrating with righteous indignation. Her words, though full of entitlement, were sharp with the venom Mr. Patel had heard before, too many times. The camera in Lane 3 was angled, slightly downward, but he could see enough. The way she loomed over Marcus, the way her voice cut through the air like broken glass, and perhaps more telling, the way the other customers had frozen, caught between confusion and fear, unsure whether to speak up or stay silent. Mr. Patel's lips pressed into a thin line. From anyone else, it might have looked like nothing more than a customer complaint, an argument, a difficult woman having a bad day, but not to him. To him, this was a test of character and not Marcus's. A small red light blinked at the bottom of the screen, indicating the footage was being recorded. He clicked on the volume dial, turning it slightly higher. "You people never want to hear it, do you?" Diane hissed. That was the moment his face changed. Mr. Patel's usual expression was hard to read, composed, distant. He was a man who prided himself on staying calm under pressure, who measured his words carefully and rarely involved himself in the chaos of retail life. He had hired a good team for that: managers, cashiers, stockers. He trusted them to handle day-to-day problems without needing him to step in. But this was not a stocking error, not an overcharged dispute, not even a customer with a bad attitude. This was personal. He sat back slowly in his chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. His eyes remained locked on the screen, watching the way Marcus held his ground with quiet grace. The man hadn't so much as raised his voice, even as Diane hurled insult after insult. Mr. Patel could see it in his posture, the restraint, the choice to be calm when everything in the moment begged him not to be, and it made something tighten in Mr. Patel's cliff, because he had seen this story before, just with different faces, years ago. Back when he first emigrated from Gujarat with his wife and baby son, he had taken a job as a clerk in a gas station. The pay was terrible, the hours long, and the abuse subtle, sometimes, other times not. He still remembered the man who'd thrown coins at him rather than hand them over, the woman who asked if he even spoke English, the teenagers who mocked his accent as he rang up their snacks. He had learned quickly that surviving in America meant learning to bite your tongue and lower your eyes, even when the fire inside you burned hot. But he had promised himself one thing: the day he opened Maple Market, no one who worked for him would ever have to shrink the way he had to. Not under his roof. Ever. He reached slowly for his phone. For a moment, he hovered over the security feed, thumb poised to rewind, but he didn't need to replay anything. He had seen enough. Outside the office door, the world continued, on the shuffling of customers, the creak of carts, the rustling of plastic bags. But in Mr. Patel's office, time felt still, cold, focused. He straightened his tie, ran a hand over his salt and pepper hair, and stood. His reflection, in the dark monitor glass, looked back at him, not the soft-spoken man who handled payroll and ordered inventory, not the kind store owner who offered free fruit to children and gift baskets to the church at Christmas. This was the protector, the quiet sentinel behind the scenes. And today, the line had been crossed. As he stepped out of the office, his polished leather shoes tapping softly against the back hall floor, he said nothing. He didn't need to, because justice wasn't loud. It didn't need to shout. Sometimes, it simply walked straight toward the storm. Diane stood triumphantly at the checkout counter, her chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. Her tirade had run its course, words flung like daggers, cutting deep into a man who had never once lost his composure. To her, the battle was over. She had said what she came to say, put a worker in his place. She barely noticed the silence that had settled like dust across the store. Without a glance at the shaken customer she had shoved past, she huffed and began unloading her items onto the counter: organic granola, bottled alkaline water, a frozen acai bowl. She slammed them down like punctuation marks, still muttering under her breath. Marcus said nothing. His hands moved in quiet rhythm: lift, scan, beep, each motion smooth, careful. But behind the calm in his face, something deeper stirred. He could still hear her words echoing: "You people, incompetent, quota." He felt the weight of them, not just for himself, but for every time he'd seen someone like her raise her voice at someone like him, safe in the belief that nothing would come of it. And maybe, he thought, nothing would. He tapped a button on the register, eyes focused on the glowing screen. "That'll be $32.48, he said quietly. Diane didn't even respond. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out a sleek platinum credit card, and swiped it with a flick of the wrist. Her chin was lifted high again. Her posture screamed entitlement. In her mind, the transaction had been completed, not just the purchase, but the performance. She had conquered the room, reasserted her power, and was now ready to leave, with both her groceries and her pride intact. But then the back office door swung open, and the air shifted. From behind the swinging doors, Mr. Patel emerged with quiet steps that rang louder than any of Diane's shouting. He walked with deliberate purpose, adjusting the sleeves of his buttoned shirt, his eyes calm but unreadable. His expression was neither angry nor emotional. It was measured, controlled in a way that made people instinctively turn and look. The sound of the sliding doors behind the counter, the dull beeping of the next register, everything paused. Even the jazz music above seemed to fade. Marcus froze as he saw him approach. Customers turned. The teenager with the orange juice blinked. Diane, finally sensing the shift in energy, looked up just as the credit card reader flashed approved. Before she could reach for her receipt, Mr. Patel stopped just short of the register. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point a finger. He simply said, with quiet, clear authority, "Ma'am, you need to leave, and you won't be coming back." It took a second for Diane to process the words. She blinked. "I'm sorry, I saw everything," Mr. Patel replied evenly. "I heard everything. We don't tolerate abuse of any kind in this store, especially not toward my employees." The temperature in the room dropped. Diane laughed, a nervous, sharp laugh that sounded more like offense than amusement. "You're banning me over this? Are you serious?" "I'm very serious," Mr. Patel said. She looked around now, desperate for someone to side with her, but the customers behind her said nothing. The older woman she had insulted earlier had taken a step closer, arms folded, gaze unwavering. A man near the bread aisle slowly shook his head. No one was with her. "This is ridiculous," Diane cried. "I've shopped here for years. You're going to ban a loyal customer just because your employee was being difficult?" Marcus remained still behind the counter. His eyes met Mr. Patel's for a brief moment. No words passed between them, but something did. Acknowledgement, maybe. Respect. Mr. Patel stepped a little closer, lowering his voice but not his presence. "Marcus did nothing wrong. He treated you with professionalism and kindness. You responded with prejudice and cruelty. That tells me everything I need to know." Diane's face flushed red, her lips trembling as if she couldn't decide whether to scream again or storm out. Her pride swelled like a balloon, but there was no room left to breathe. "If you choose to raise your voice again," Mr. Patel continued, "I'll be happy to call the police and report you for disorderly conduct, but I suggest you take your things and go." Quietly, the store remained still, the moment sharp as glass. Diane's eyes darted one last time, searching the crowd for support. None came. Her hand shot out and grabbed her bag of groceries. She clutched it to her chest like a shield, turned on her, and marched toward the exit with as much dignity as she could scrape together. The automatic doors hissed open and closed behind her, and then silence again. Not empty silence. Relieved silence. Mr. Patel exhaled slowly, then turned to Marcus. "You handled that with more grace than most would have." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you, sir." The older woman in line stepped forward and touched Marcus's hand gently. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," she said. "You did nothing wrong." One by one, the customers began to move again, but differently now, like the current had shifted. A few nodded at Marcus. A man gave him a thumbs up. Someone clapped soft but sincere. The moment had passed, but the memory would stay, and so would the message. In this store, in this space, dignity would be protected, respect would be demanded, and silence would not be the default. Diane stood triumphantly at the checkout counter, her chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. Her tirade had run its course, words flung like daggers, cutting deep into a man who had never once lost his composure. To her, the battle was over. She had said what she came to say, put a worker in his place. She barely noticed the silence that had settled like dust across the store. Without a glance at the shaken customer she had shoved past, she huffed and began unloading her items. Onto the counter, organic granola, bottled alkaline water, a frozen acai bowl. She slammed them down like punctuation marks. Still muttering under her breath, Marcus said nothing. His hands moved in quiet rhythm. Lift, scan, beep, each motion smooth, careful, but behind the calm in his face, something deeper stirred. He could still hear her words, echoing, "You people, incompetent, quota." He felt the weight of them, not just for himself, but for every time he'd seen someone like her raise her voice at someone like him, safe in the belief that nothing would come of it. And maybe, he thought, nothing would. He tapped a button on the register, eyes focused on the glowing screen. "That'll be $32.48, he said quietly. Diane didn't even respond. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out a sleek platinum credit card, and swiped it with a flick of the wrist. Her chin was lifted high again. Her posture screamed entitlement. In her mind, the transaction had been completed, not just the purchase, but the performance. She had conquered the room, reasserted her power, and was now ready to leave with both her groceries and her pride intact. But then the back office door swung open, and the air shifted. From behind the swinging doors, Mr. Patel emerged with quiet steps that rang louder than any of Diane's shouting. He walked with deliberate purpose, adjusting the sleeves of his buttoned shirt, his eyes calm but unreadable. His expression was neither angry nor emotional. It was measured, controlled in a way that made people instinctively turn and look. The sound of the sliding doors behind the counter, the dull beeping of the next register, everything paused. Even the jazz music above seemed to fade. Marcus froze as he saw him approach. Customers turned. The teenager with the orange juice blinked. Diane, finally sensing the shift in energy, looked up just as the credit card reader flashed approved. Before she could reach for her receipt, Mr. Patel stopped just short of the register. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point a finger. He simply said, with quiet, clear authority, "Ma'am, you need to leave, and you won't be coming back." It took a second for Diane to process the words. She blinked. "I'm sorry. I saw everything," Mr. Patel replied evenly. "I heard everything. We don't tolerate abuse of any kind in this store, especially not toward my employees." The temperature in the room dropped. Diane laughed, a nervous, sharp laugh that sounded more like offense than amusement. "You're banning me over this. Are you serious?" "I'm very serious," Mr. Patel said. She looked around now, desperate for someone to side with her, but the customers behind her said nothing. The older woman she had insulted earlier had taken a step closer, arms folded, gaze unwavering. A man near the bread aisle slowly shook his head. No one was with her. "This is ridiculous," Diane cried. "I've shopped here for years. You're going to ban a loyal customer just because your employee was being difficult." Marcus remained still behind the counter. His eyes met Mr. Patel's for a brief moment. No words passed between them, but something did. Acknowledgement, maybe. "Respect." Mr. Patel stepped a little closer, lowering his voice but not his presence. "Marcus did nothing wrong. He treated you with professionalism and kindness. You responded with prejudice and cruelty. That tells me everything I need to know." Diane's face flushed red, her lips trembling as if she couldn't decide whether to scream again or storm out. Her pride swelled like a balloon, but there was no room left to breathe. "If you choose to raise your voice again," Mr. Patel continued, "I'll be happy to call the police and report you for disorderly conduct. But I suggest you take your things and go." Quietly, the store remained still, the moment sharp as glass. Diane's eyes darted one last time, searching the crowd for support. None came. Her hand shot out and grabbed her bag of groceries. She clutched it to her chest like a shield, turned on her hilt and marched toward the exit with as much dignity as she could scrape together. The automatic doors hissed open and closed behind her, and then silence again, not empty silence. Relieved silence. Mr. Patel exhaled slowly, then turned to Marcus. "You handled that with more grace than most would have." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you, sir." The older woman in line stepped forward and touched Marcus's hand gently. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," she said. "You did nothing wrong." One by one, the customers began to move again, but differently now, like the current had shifted. A few nodded at Marcus. A man gave him a thumbs up. Someone clapped soft but sincere. The moment had passed, but the memory would stay, and so would the message. In this store, in this space, dignity would be protected, respect would be demanded, and silence would not be the default. The doors hissed shut behind Diane with a finality that felt almost poetic. Outside, the afternoon sun poured down on the sidewalk, too bright, too peaceful for the storm that had just passed. Inside Maple Market, the air still held the weight of what had just happened. There was no cheering, no dramatic applause, only the hum of fridges and quiet acknowledgement, a subtle shift in atmosphere that said, "We saw, we understood." Mr. Patel stood silently for a moment, his back to the doors, his gaze fixed somewhere distant. Then, slowly, he turned to Marcus. The young man was still at his register, standing tall, composed as ever, but now, his hands were slightly clenched at his sides. He hadn't spoken since Diane left, hadn't moved. There was a stillness about him, as if he hadn't quite exhaled yet. Mr. Patel stepped closer, not the measured steps of an owner addressing an employee, but something quieter, more personal. He stopped just beside the counter and spoke, low enough that only Marcus could hear. "You remind me of my son." Marcus blinked. The words hit harder than he expected. He turned his head, slowly, to meet Mr. Patel's eyes. There was something new there, no longer just the firm, unreadable mask of a business owner, no longer just authority or professionalism. There was depth now, pain even, a story hiding in the lines around his eyes. Marcus asked, uncertain. Mr. Patel smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He was about your age when he left," he said. "His name was Arjun Brightkid, studied architecture, top of his class." Marcus listened, the air between them thick with stillness. "He used to help me stock shelves," Mr. Patel continued. "Back when we first opened, before we had employees, he'd carry boxes bigger than him and still find time to talk to customers like he owned the place." A small chuckle escaped him, soft, nostalgic. But no matter how hard he worked, no matter how polite or kind he was, there was always someone who looked at him like he didn't belong here. Marcus swallowed, throat tight. They followed him in stores, called him names under their breath, told him to go back where he came from, even though he was born in New Jersey. Mr. Patel's voice grew quieter, and for the first time it wavered. "I tried to protect him, told him to keep his head down, to be patient, to let it roll off his back." He paused. "But one day he said to me, 'Baba, it doesn't roll off, it sinks in.'" Marcus felt a slow, deep ache in his chest. "He moved to Canada 5 years ago," Mr. Patel said. "He said he needed to breathe, to feel human." A silence settled between them, full of weight and memory. Mr. Patel looked away for a moment, blinking against a shine in his eyes he hadn't planned to show. "I couldn't stop what happened to him," he said. "I couldn't be there in every room where they made him feel small." Then he looked back at Marcus's voice, firmer now. "But I can do something now." Marcus didn't speak, couldn't. He'd never heard Mr. Patel speak like this before, ever seen the man behind the suit, the title, the schedule. But now he saw him clearly, a father carrying a wound that hadn't fully closed, a man who had once stayed silent, and had decided, finally, not to be silent again. Mr. Patel continued, more gently. You didn't just handle that with professionalism, Marcus. You handled it with grace, with dignity. He paused. That kind of strength. That matters more than anything on a resume. Marcus felt the words hit something deep inside him. For years he had made himself smaller to keep peace, measured his words, smiled when it hurt, endured slights with silence, because speaking up too boldly could cost him everything. And yet, today, for the first time in a long while, he felt seen. You shouldn't have had to go through that, Mr. Patel said, but you weren't alone. Marcus nodded slowly. A quiet breath escaped his lips. Thank you, sir, he said, voice low. Mr. Patel placed a hand gently on Marcus's shoulder. You're more than just a cashier here, Marcus. You're part of what this store stands for. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't shouted from the aisles. But to Marcus, those words landed heavier than applause, because they were real. The quiet kind of recognition that said, you matter, you are not invisible. A moment passed. Then Mr. Patel gave a small nod and stepped back. Take your break, he said softly. You've earned it. As Mr. Patel walked away, Marcus stood still for another moment. He looked out across the store, the regulars returning to their shopping, the calm resettling into the shelves, the slow rhythm of normalcy creeping back in. But something had changed. Not just in the store. In him. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus didn't feel like he was just surviving the day. He felt like he belonged in it. The next morning, the sun rose soft and golden over Greystone, spilling across the sidewalks, over cafe awnings, and through the broad glass windows of Maple Market. Birds called in the distance, and the town stirred awake with the familiar rhythm of routine coffee, errands, school drop-offs. But inside the market, something was different. The atmosphere had shifted, subtle at first, like the quiet aftermath of a storm. But soon, it became undeniable. The video had started circulating the evening before, not from the store's account. Mr. Patel never released the footage himself, but from a teenager who had recorded part of the incident on his phone and uploaded it with the caption, "She said what?" to the cashier. He handled it like a king. Views climbed, the comments poured in. Some were furious, others heartbroken. A few tried to defend Diane, suggesting she had just been stressed or taken out of context. But the video told its own story. The expression on Marcus's face, the tone of her voice, the crowd's stunned silence. By sunrise, the entire town was talking, and by late morning, Maple Market saw something it hadn't expected. They came in, quietly. At first, a middle-aged woman in scrubs stopped at lane 3, her basket half full, and said, "Just wanted you to know. I saw what happened. You were amazing." A father with 2 kids nodded at Marcus as he passed. "We got your back, man." Even a grizzled man from the auto shop who usually grunted more than spoke paused at the register and muttered, "Damn proud of you." Word had spread, not just of the incident, but of how it had been handled, how Mr. Patel had stepped forward, how Marcus had stood his ground, how the store hadn't quietly swept it under the rug, like so many others had done before. By midweek, flowers began to appear. Small bouquets left beside Marcus's register, a thank you card, a sticky note with a drawing from a child that simply said, "You're a good guy." It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about what the moment stood for, about every time someone had kept their mouth shut, because speaking up felt dangerous, about every cashier, janitor, delivery worker, or receptionist who had been belittled and told to smile through it. It was about the quiet promise that things could be different. Mr. Patel watched it all unfold from behind the scenes, his usual quiet presence more observant than ever. And then, one Thursday morning, he walked to the front of the store with a folded sign in his hands and a small stepladder under his arm. Bart Marcus watched from lane 3 as Mr. Patel climbed up just beside the sliding glass entrance doors and affixed a new placard above the "Welcome to Maple Market" banner. The letters were clean, bold, and simple. "Respect is required, always." People stopped to read it. Some smiled, some took photos. A few even clapped quietly as they entered. And it stuck. Not just the sign, but the message. It rippled through the store. Invisible but strong, woven into the way customers spoke to the employees, the way staff looked out for one another. Something about the air felt more human. And Marcus, he changed. To not overnight, He still clocked in 5 minutes early, still wore his uniform neat and ironed, still greeted each customer with a quiet "how's your day?" But there was something new in the way he stood, straighter, lighter, a confidence that didn't come from defiance, but from being seen. Not long after, Mr. Patel asked if he'd be willing to train the new hires, young high school students working their first jobs, nervous college students on summer break. Marcus had hesitated at first, unsure if he was qualified. "You don't need a title to lead," Mr. Patel told him. "You just need integrity." So Marcus agreed. He started small, walking them through the register buttons, showing them how to double bag heavy items, how to talk to customers without rushing. But more importantly, he taught them how to carry themselves when faced with tension. "When someone comes at you loud," he told a new trainee one afternoon, "you don't always have to match their volume. Sometimes, being calm is more powerful than shouting." And when the trainee asked, "But what if I freeze up?" Marcus had smiled, just a little. "Then take a breath," he said, "and remember, someone's got your back here." The trainee nodded, and Marcus saw himself in that nod, his younger self, unsure, careful, hoping to belong. He was the one others looked to, and he didn't need applause or headlines. The quiet nods, the flowers, the handshakes, the kid who fist bumped him and said, "You're kind of a legend now." That was more than enough. There are moments in life that vanish the moment they pass. Quiet, ordinary, easily forgotten. And then there are the ones that ripple outward. Marcus hadn't set out to make a statement. He hadn't come to work that day hoping to change anything. He had just shown up like he always did, on time, quiet, steady, hoping to finish his shift, collect his check, and go home in peace. But peace wasn't something that came easily. When you wore a name tag and a quiet voice in a world that rewarded volume and money. What Diane had done wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. That's what made it so exhausting. It wasn't the first time someone had treated him like less. What made it different, what changed everything, was that someone finally said, "Enough." And once that happened, the silence cracked. For years, Marcus had carried the weight of keeping the peace. He'd been taught, both by words and the hard lessons of experience, that speaking up might cost him his job, his safety, his dignity, that people like Diane were protected by status, by noise, by the assumption that they were always right. But now the world had seen the truth. It was grainy cell phone footage, barely a minute long, but it was undeniable. It showed a man being disrespected and choosing not to retaliate, not to escalate, but to stand firm, to hold his dignity like a shield. And it showed a boss, an immigrant, a father stepping out from the shadows and refusing to let injustice go unanswered. That was what people responded to, not drama. Decency. And in that, there was a lesson, one that spread beyond the aisles of Maple Market, beyond the comment sections and reposts and whispered conversations in the break rooms of other stores across the country. Because people didn't just see Marcus and Mr. Patel, they saw themselves. They saw every time they'd stayed quiet. Every time they'd watched someone be talked down to, someone bagging groceries, wiping tables, delivering food, and hadn't stepped in. Not because they agreed with the cruelty, but because they didn't know if it was their place, because no one else had. But when Mr. Patel stepped forward that day, he didn't just protect Marcus. He gave everyone else permission to speak, to act, to say that's not okay, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's easier to look away. And slowly, things began to shift. The local hardware store posted a sign just like Maple Market's, "Respect is required always." The high school student council hosted a talk on confronting casual racism in public spaces. A barista at the cafe down the street was quietly promoted to shift lead after she stood up to a customer who cursed at a younger co-worker. Not headlines, not revolutions, but change. And change, Marcus had learned, doesn't always come with a raw. Sometimes it begins in a whisper. Sometimes it's in the look passed between two strangers, the kind that says, "I saw what you did, you're not alone." Sometimes it's in a child watching her father apologize to a cashier for being short-tempered. Sometimes it's in the quiet strength of a man choosing not to meet hate with hate, but with unshakable calm. And above all else, it's in remembering that kindness is not weakness, that holding your head high in the face of cruelty takes more strength than shouting ever could, that being calm is not the same as being silent, and being silent is not the same as being complicit, because silence, when injustice walks into the room, is permission, and permission is power. Marcus didn't set out to be powerful, but he became powerful the moment he stood his ground. And Mr. Patel became powerful the moment he chose to stand beside him, rather than hide behind policy, reputation, or fear of backlash. Together, they rewrote the rules of what was acceptable in that space, and in doing so, they reminded everyone of something vital. We teach people how to treat others by what we tolerate, so when we stop tolerating cruelty, even in its smallest forms, when we hold the line, not with violence, but with unwavering decency, we change the atmosphere. We reset the expectation that we say, this is who we are, this is what we value: respect, dignity, courage in quiet moments. Marcus still bags groceries, he still says thank you after every transaction, still smiles, still offers to help older customers to their cars. But now, when people look at him, they don't just see a cashier, they see a man who stood up, and because he stood, others learned they could too.